16-year-old Kian followed the same narrow trail almost every evening. It wasn't a routine he planned. It simply became the only place where his mind felt quiet. The edge of the forest held a stillness he never found anywhere else. The tall pines stood like silent guards, and the cold evening air carried nothing but the soft rustle of leaves. As the sun dipped lower, the light shifted into a gentle orange glow. Kian walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, breathing steadily. His thoughts calm and steady until something unusual broke the silence. A faint cry drifted from deeper inside the trees. Kian stopped immediately. At first he thought he imagined it. The sound was so soft it barely reached him. But then he heard it again, thin, muffled, and trembling. It didn't sound like a bird. It didn't sound like any forest animal he recognized. It sounded like a baby. One tiny word seemed to rise between the trees. Ma. Ma. Kian's chest tightened. Confusion washed over him. There were no houses nearby, no families with children who wandered into these woods. He listened again, this time holding his breath. The cry came once more. Weak and lonely. Something inside him refused to walk away. Kian turned off the trail and stepped into the deeper shadows of the forest. The cold branches brushed against his arms as he moved carefully, listening for every faint sound. Step by step, he followed the voice calling out in the distance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Kian moved slowly through the thickening trees, following the weak cry as it rose and faded in uneven waves. The deeper he walked, the colder the air felt. The forest floor softened under his boots, covered in damp leaves and fallen needles. Every few seconds he paused and listened, making sure he was still heading in the right direction. The cry grew clearer. It wasn't steady. It stuttered, as if the little voice was struggling just to make a sound. Then Kian saw something half hidden beside a fallen log. A cloth sack, old and dirty, lay crumpled in the leaves. Its top was tied with a rough rope, pulled tight as if meant to keep something inside. The sack twitched faintly. A small trembling sound came from within, soft, desperate, barely holding on. Kian's heart thumped hard in his chest. Someone had left something here, alone. Helpless, he knelt beside the sack, his hands shaking as he reached for the knot. The rope was tight, rough against his fingers, but he worked it loose little by little. The crying inside grew sharper, as if whoever was trapped felt his touch and begged for release. When the knot finally came undone, Kian opened the sack carefully. His breath caught. Inside was a small creature, curled tightly against the fabric, covered in thick dark fur. Its tiny hands trembled from cold. Its chest rose only slightly with each fragile breath. The creature turned its head weakly, and Kian saw its eyes, large, wet, and filled with fear. A baby Bigfoot, barely alive. The baby let out a faint, broken sound. Ma. Ma. A sound that wasn't human, yet carried the same plea any infant would make when begging for comfort. Kian felt his throat tighten. He wasn't looking at a monster. He was looking at a dying child. The baby reached toward him with a small shaking hand, its fingers curling around the air as if searching for anyone to hold on to. And in that moment, Kian knew he could not walk away. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Kian stayed crouched beside the sack, barely breathing. The tiny Bigfoot's hand moved again, brushing weakly against his wrist. Its fur was cold, its skin beneath even colder. This wasn't just abandonment, this was something far worse. Someone had left it here to die. As the truth settled in, the forest around him suddenly felt different. The silence grew heavier, almost pressing against his ears. The trees no longer seemed calm. They stood like tall shadows watching him. Every rustle, every distant crack of a twig made him look over his shoulder. The baby's breathing was uneven, each breath softer than the last, reminding him how little time it had left. Kian lifted his head and scanned the forest. What if the one who abandoned it was still nearby? What if something dangerous was watching from the dark? His heartbeat thudded in his chest. He swallowed hard and gently pulled the small creature closer. The baby let out a faint whimper, its tiny fingers curling toward his jacket. As if begging him not to leave, Kian knew what every instinct should tell him: run. Stay away, don't get involved with something this unknown. But another thought pushed even stronger. If he walked away now, this child would die within minutes. He couldn't accept that. Not after hearing it cry. Not after seeing its eyes. Kian reached into the sack and lifted the baby out carefully, supporting its head the way he had seen adults do with human infants. The baby's small body sagged into his hands. It didn't have the strength to cling to him anymore. Its breaths were shallow, almost silent. A cold breeze swept through the trees, sending a chill across the clearing. Kian tightened his grip, shielding the baby against his chest. He looked once more into the dark woods. Whatever danger existed there suddenly felt less important than the helpless creature in his arms. He couldn't leave it. He wouldn't leave it. With a deep breath, Kian made his decision. He would take the baby with him, before the forest swallowed the last bit of life it had left. Kian carefully wrapped the small, trembling body in his jacket, pressing it close to his chest. The baby Bigfoot was fragile, its tiny arms barely moving as it clung weakly. Each breath came shallow and uneven, and Kian felt a tight knot of worry twist in his stomach. He had no idea how long it had been left alone, but he knew it couldn't survive much longer without warmth and care. The walk home was slow. Every step through the damp forest floor was cautious, measured. Kian kept his eyes on the shadows, half expecting the person who had abandoned the creature to appear from behind the trees, but the forest remained quiet. The baby whimpered softly, a sound that tugged at Kian's heart, and he whispered gentle words, hoping the creature could feel comfort even if it didn't understand. Branches brushed against his arms, and the wind stirred the pine needles beneath his feet, but Kian barely noticed. All his attention was on the tiny life in his arms. He imagined how cold it must have felt, lying helpless in that sack. He couldn't shake the memory of its weak cries or the way its small fingers had searched for someone to hold. By the time he reached his house, Kian's clothes were damp, and his chest ached from holding the baby so carefully. But relief and quiet determination filled him. He slipped through the back door, careful not to make a sound, and carried the baby to the small shed behind the house. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, safe, and private, a temporary sanctuary until he could figure out what to do next. Kian laid the baby gently on a soft blanket. It stirred faintly, letting out a low, trembling murmur, and pressed its face into the warmth of the fabric. Kian's hands hovered over it, unsure whether to touch or simply remain near. The baby's faint whimpers continued, a fragile sound that filled the quiet shed with both sorrow and hope. Kian stayed beside it, silently promising that it would not be left alone again. He had made a decision. He would care for this tiny, abandoned life, no matter what it took. The night settled over Kian's small shed with a quiet heaviness. Outside, the forest whispered with the wind through the trees, but inside, time felt suspended. Kian sat beside the tiny creature, watching every subtle rise and fall of its chest. The baby Bigfoot was so fragile, its small body shivering under the blanket, its breaths shallow and irregular. Each weak sound it made Kian's chest tighten, and he pressed the blanket closer, wrapping it around the creature like a shield against the cold night. He had never seen anything so vulnerable. Its fur, though thick, did little to warm it, and its tiny hands occasionally twitched, searching for comfort. Kian gently placed his hands beneath the baby, supporting its head and shoulders, careful not to jostle it. The creature let out a faint whimper, barely audible, and Kian whispered soft words, steady and calm, as if trying to reassure it without startling it further. Time passed slowly. Kian checked its breathing repeatedly, counting the shallow rises of its chest. He poured a few drops of water onto a leaf and gently offered it to the baby. It sipped weakly, then relaxed slightly against his hands. Every small movement, every faint breath, felt like a victory against the odds. The night felt endless, yet Kian remained steadfast. He stayed awake, refusing to let his own fatigue take over. He hummed quietly, a gentle tune, hoping the sound would comfort the tiny creature. Its small fingers occasionally curled around his, a fragile sign of trust and recognition. Hours drifted by. Outside, the wind whispered and branches scraped lightly against the shed. But inside, a fragile warmth grew between boy and baby. Kian never let go, never looked away. He could feel life slowly returning, fragile but steady. By the time the first light of dawn touched the forest, the baby stirred more strongly, opening its eyes briefly and giving a weak, hopeful sound. Kian exhaled a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had kept it alive through the night, through the cold, through fear, through uncertainty. And in that quiet morning light, he knew he had done something important. He had chosen to protect a life that otherwise might have been lost. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Asterisk. By the time the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, Kian had grown quiet, watching over the baby Bigfoot in the small shed. The tiny creature was no longer as weak as the night before, but it was still fragile, its breaths uneven and small. Kian's hands remained hovering over it, ready to protect, comfort, or intervene if needed. He had no idea what might come next, but a growing unease tugged at the edges of his mind. Then he heard it. Heavy footsteps in the distance, slow but deliberate, moving through the forest toward his home. The sound wasn't human. It was deeper, heavier, too steady, too purposeful to belong to any ordinary animal. Kian froze, his heart tightening. He didn't know exactly what he was listening for, but instinct told him it was connected to the baby he held in his arms. He quietly moved to the small window of the shed and peered through the shadows. The forest beyond seemed alive with movement. Trees shifted slightly as something large moved between them. The branches scratched against one another, creating a rhythmic sound that echoed faintly in the morning air. The presence was enormous, almost overpowering, yet careful, deliberate, searching. Kian realized, with a shock that made his stomach tighten, that this was no ordinary encounter. A mother Bigfoot was out there, searching for her child. The thought brought a mixture of awe and fear. She might be protective, even aggressive, but she was also looking for her lost baby. Kian understood that he was holding something precious, something irreplaceable, and that the forest itself seemed to be holding its breath along with him. For a long moment, he remained still, listening. The steps grew closer and then paused, as if the creature was sniffing the air, sensing, trying to locate her child. Kian's mind raced. Should he hide? Should he reveal himself? He knew the baby could die without his care, yet the mother's presence complicated everything. The forest felt tense, almost alive, as if acknowledging the fragile balance between Kian, the baby, and the unknown mother. And then he made a decision. He would not run. He would protect this small life, yet he would respect whatever force awaited outside the shed. His eyes never left the shadows, watching, waiting, feeling every heartbeat, every tremor in the forest. The mother was near, and soon they would meet. Asterisk, asterisk. Kian stepped cautiously out of the shed, holding the baby Bigfoot wrapped carefully in his jacket. The morning light was soft, filtering through the forest canopy, painting the clearing in muted shades of gold and green. His heart raced, but he kept his movements slow, deliberate, and calm. Every step was measured. He wanted to show that he meant no harm. From the shadows between the tall pines, a figure emerged. Massive, covered in thick dark fur, and moving with both strength and caution, it was unmistakably a Bigfoot. The mother's eyes locked onto her child immediately. Her movements froze for a heartbeat, then trembled with urgency. Heavy, deliberate steps carried her closer, each one echoing softly on the forest floor. The baby in Kian's arms stirred and made a weak, desperate sound. "Ma! Ma!" The mother's low, quivering call answered it. Kian froze, holding the child out slightly, hands open, showing nothing but care. The mother approached slowly, pausing repeatedly, as if measuring the safety of the boy holding her child. Her eyes, dark and expressive, seemed filled with both fear and hope. Kian could feel the tension in the clearing. One wrong move could startle her, and yet the mother was careful, protective, almost gentle in her massive frame. Step by step, she closed the distance, rumbling softly, eyes never leaving her baby. When she finally reached them, she bent low, her massive hands hovering close to the ground, and then gently accepted her child from Kian. The baby's tiny fingers twitched once before curling against her chest. Relief and recognition passed silently between them. Kian stepped back, watching, heart pounding. He realized that, despite her size and the fear the world might feel toward her kind, she was nothing but a mother. Her love, concern, and tenderness were the same as any human parent's. The sight filled him with awe, gratitude, and a quiet respect that he would never forget. In that forest clearing, the boy and the mother shared a moment of trust, understanding, and peace. A silent agreement that Kian had done what he could and that the mother recognized it. The mother Bigfoot cradled her baby close, pressing the small trembling body against her broad chest. The tiny creature let out a faint, weak cry, and she responded with a low, soft rumble that seemed to soothe every tremor in its fragile frame. Kian stepped back, giving her space, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him. He had witnessed something extraordinary: pure, unconditional care, raw and real, yet entirely gentle. The baby pressed its small face into the mother's fur, relaxing slightly with each protective movement she made. Her hands, massive yet careful, stroked lightly across the tiny body, checking for injuries. Kian could see the gratitude in her eyes, not only for the return of her child, but for the boy who had saved it from certain death. The forest seemed to hold its breath, leaves barely rustling, as if acknowledging the significance of what was unfolding. For a long, silent moment, the mother and child remained entwined. Kian's chest tightened, and he realized how fragile life could be, how important even the smallest acts of kindness were. The baby's breathing grew steadier, its eyes fluttering open briefly, meeting its mother's gaze. She hummed softly, a low, rumbling sound that carried reassurance and love. The baby responded with a tiny, hopeful movement, curling its fingers more securely into her fur. Then, as if understanding Kian's presence, the mother lowered one massive hand toward the ground. It was a subtle gesture, a sign of acknowledgement, respect, and trust. Kian stepped back further, letting her have full control of the moment. He felt awe and a quiet, almost spiritual connection to the creatures before him. Finally, the mother rose, still holding the baby tightly against her chest. She gave Kian one last long look, a gaze full of recognition and silent thanks, before turning slowly and retreating into the forest. Her steps were careful, protective, yet confident, each one carrying the baby safely toward home. Kian remained in the clearing, heart full, watching until they disappeared among the trees. The quiet hum of the forest returned, and he realized he had just witnessed something rare, an encounter that would stay with him forever. Kian stood in the clearing, the morning light filtering gently through the forest canopy. The mother Bigfoot had disappeared among the tall pines, carrying her baby safely against her chest, yet the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. He felt a strange mixture of awe, relief, and quiet humility. He had done what he could, he had saved a life, and in return, he had been given a glimpse into something few humans would ever see. For a long moment, he remained still, listening to the soft rustle of the trees, the distant calls of birds, and the faint echo of the mother's rumble fading into the forest. It was as if the world itself had acknowledged what had just happened. Kian realized that the forest, with all its secrets and dangers, had trusted him. It had allowed him to become a small part of something extraordinary. A guardian of life at a moment when it hung by a thread. He thought back to the baby's tiny fingers, curling weakly around his own, seeking warmth and safety. That fragile grip had spoken volumes about trust, about vulnerability, about the quiet courage it took to survive. And he thought of the mother's eyes, filled with both sorrow and gratitude, and how her final glance had been a silent acknowledgement of his role. No words were spoken between them, yet the message was clear. He had done right by them, and they would never forget him. Kian breathed deeply, allowing the emotions to settle within him. He had entered the forest that evening as a boy seeking calm, and he emerged as someone who had touched a life in a profound way. He understood that some acts of kindness required courage, patience, and respect, and that sometimes the simplest gesture could change the course of a life. As he turned back toward his home, Kian promised himself silently that he would carry the memory of this encounter always. He would keep the secret, not out of fear, but out of respect for the bond he had witnessed. The forest had entrusted him with a moment of life and love, and he would honor it quietly, forever. The wind whispered softly through the pines, as if echoing the silent promise he had made to never forget, to always respect, and to protect life whenever it cried out for help. ****. Years later, Kian still remembered that day with perfect clarity. The forest, the faint cry, the fragile little creature in his arms, all of it lingered in his memory like a quiet, persistent echo. He never spoke of it to anyone, not out of fear, but out of respect. Some experiences were too profound to be shared with the world. Some lives too sacred to put into words. He recalled the baby's tiny fingers curling weakly around his hand, the soft tremble in its body, and the desperate, pleading sound of its cry. And he remembered the mother's eyes, the depth of her gratitude, the raw tenderness that came from a parent reunited with a child. Those moments had left an imprint on his heart, teaching him something he would carry forever, that love, in any form, was powerful, patient, and quietly persistent. Kian thought about the forest itself, the way it had held its breath, the way it had allowed him to be a part of that fragile balance. He realized that the world was not always as it seemed. Beneath the quiet rustle of leaves, beneath the stillness of shadows, life thrived in ways that demanded care and attention. Sometimes all it took was a single person willing to listen, to act, to protect. Even now he could hear the faint echo of the baby's cry, feel the warmth of its small body, and see the mother's gaze of silent thanks. It reminded him that acts of compassion mattered, that even the smallest gestures could change the course of a life. And as he walked through the forest, years later, Kian understood this truth. Some cries are meant to be answered. Some lives are meant to be saved. And sometimes, the forest chooses the right person to hear the truth.